The story kicks off at Nottingham Mansion. Madelyn stands tall, her voice firm as she tells the Earl that she might have pitied him once. But love? That was never in the equation. The words hit harder than a slap. Ian Nottingham, leaning on his walking stick, takes a step forward, visibly shaken by her bluntness. He mutters bitterly that she probably finds him more grotesque now that she's this close, then reaches out, gripping her hand a little too tightly as he throws the accusation she dreaded. Was that why she was unfaithful? Was the Baron really that irresistible? Did that charming snake whisper sweet promises of forever? But Madelyn meets his gaze without flinching and tells him to believe whatever suits him best. Ian tells her that regardless of what she does or how much she tries to rewrite her story, she remains his wife and he is still her husband. That word, husband, sits bitterly on her tongue. She reminds him that he has never once treated her like a wife and now it's over. She wants out. He stares into her eyes and asks if she ever truly loved him. Her only reply is a plea for him to let her go. But Ian, ever the brooding lord, vows she'll never escape him, not even in death. He declares she will not leave, even if the entire cursed mansion crumbles to the ground. She yanks her hand away, demanding to know what exactly she ever did to deserve this kind of torment. She tells him she refuses to live like a ghost locked up forever, that he can't keep her here, not anymore. And just like that, she bolts. Running down the stone steps and into the open night, her thoughts run faster than her feet. Did he seriously ask if she loved another man? As if she could afford such a luxury. That wasn't love, it was revenge. Revenge on the man who locked her away, let her waste away in silence, ignored her existence while parading around like a victim. That was her fuel. Ian Nottingham deserved that betrayal. But before she can get too far, her legs give out and she crashes to the ground, her vision fading. So this is it? After 6 years in a living hell, this is how her story ends, as nothing but a disgraced woman with a scarlet letter branded across her soul. The last thing she sees is Ian, crying like a man with nothing left. For a second, that image gives her a strange comfort. If she managed to cause him just one moment of despair, maybe it was enough. Maybe that's her victory. But life apparently isn't done with her just yet. She opens her eyes to a gentle tug on her hair. A maid is calmly combing through her strands while Madelyn sits, dazed, a newspaper in hand. Wait, newspaper? She stares in disbelief. She's not dead, not in heaven, and definitely not in the burning pits of hell with Ian Nottingham and his endless monologues. She's in Rowanfield Manor, her childhood home. And not just that, she's 17 again. The maid cheerfully asks if she's feeling better. Apparently, she had been unwell for days, and everyone was worried sick. Madelyn, still trying to figure out if she's dreaming or hallucinating, simply says she's fine. The maid, bless her curious soul, notices her reading the paper and says she never used to do that. Madelyn brushes it off. She's perfectly fine. Internally, though, she's screaming. It's 1914, the year everything started falling apart, the year her world turned upside down. After her mother's death, things weren't perfect, but they were still okay. Her father, bless his clueless heart, was obsessed with all things aristocratic, while she only cared about frilly dresses and the latest fashion trends. Neither of them had the slightest idea how to survive in the real world. They were aristocrats, not economists. When their family fortune disappeared overnight thanks to a failed business venture, Madelyn had walked into the study to find her father had taken his own life. He left a will, sure, but not a single word for his only daughter. Not even a goodbye. Just like that, she was alone, without a dowry, with no one willing to take her in. That's how she ended up married to a man she'd never even met, Ian Nottingham. Lucky her, right? A noble title in exchange for a lifetime of misery. The war had left him severely damaged, and together they dragged each other into a tragedy neither of them could escape. But now, she has a chance to change everything. Walking through the garden, she thinks to herself that if she's back at 17, the disaster is just around the corner. If she can stop her father from making that disastrous investment, maybe their lives will turn out differently. But of course, her brilliant father is off wasting money on his so-called grand tour. Priorities, right? The same man who left her nothing in his will is now out there sightseeing. Suddenly, she hears someone calling her name. She turns and sees him, her father, alive and smiling, standing beside a waiting carriage. He asks if she came to welcome him home. How sweet of her. He urges her to get into the carriage. Madelyn, staring at the man who once left her behind without a word, hesitates. She would be lying if she said she never resented him. But seeing him again brings back a warmth she didn't expect. He may have been careless, but he gave her a life of comfort, and for that she still feels something. She places her hand on his and climbs into the carriage, thinking to herself that she won't waste this second chance. She'll find a way to save them both. She'll rewrite the story before it turns into the disaster she once lived. But most importantly, she swears to stay far away from Ian Nottingham, as far as the oceans would take her. But her father, ever the enthusiast for dramatic twists, cheerfully tells her that he invited a special guest today, someone he wants her to meet. A rising star, apparently. His name? Master Nottingham. He turns toward her with that all-too-familiar face. Madelyn sits quietly at the edge of the room while her father leans forward with a friendly smile, asking Ian Nottingham if he was able to accomplish what brought him to town and hopes he didn't tear away from his busy schedule just because of the invitation. Nottingham gives a polite reply, and her father nods in satisfaction, saying he's glad to hear that. Meanwhile, Madelyn can't stop staring. In her past life, he was in London by this time, so the two of them never got to meet, not like this. Her father keeps the conversation going and casually mentions he heard one of Nottingham's business ventures was incredibly successful, even calls his business sense uncanny, which earns a humble smile from the man himself. Madelyn still can't believe what she's seeing. Is this truly Ian Nottingham? Because the man in front of her is nothing like the one she remembers. In her first life, he was cold, aggressive, and had a terrifying temper. One day, she had tried to reach out to him, and he'd snapped, telling her not to touch him. Even when she apologized, he didn't soften. His butler had rushed in, and Nottingham's first reaction was to tell him to get a doctor. The memory burns in her mind. But now that same man sits across from her with legs crossed, calmly sipping tea like a perfect gentleman. She watches him trying to make sense of it. Could this really be the same Ian? Her father speaks again, saying he heard he enjoys horseback riding, and Nottingham says he does, especially racing. Madelyn almost chokes on her breath. Horseback riding? Racing? The man she married in the past wouldn't even go near a horse, let alone ride one. He limped everywhere and got irritated over the smallest things. But this version of him doesn't even flinch. It's like she's staring at a stranger wearing the face of the man she used to know. And just like that, she starts remembering the day they got married. She was 22, sitting nervously in a quiet room with her hands shaking just a little. Nottingham's butler had walked in with a kind smile and asked if she was nervous, then told her not to worry, that Ian was a good man. She wasn't frightened, not really. She was just worried. Worried that she wouldn't be a good wife. She didn't go into that marriage hoping for a fairy tale, but she wanted to be someone he could depend on. Loyal, strong, and supportive. A wife who could help him heal from all the things that broke him. But those hopes didn't last long. On their wedding night, he didn't even show up. Not the next day either. Days passed, and she barely saw him. Then one afternoon, she finally saw him sitting at the dining table, casually eating, like everything was fine. He hadn't said a word to her since the wedding. So she spoke first, telling him he seemed to have forgotten she existed, and without even looking up from his book, he said he didn't. That was the first time she frowned at him and said she was bored. He looked at her like she'd interrupted his world peace meeting. The next day, the butler brought her a puppy, saying it was a gift from Nottingham. She closed her book and just stared. A puppy. For company. As she reached to pet it, the little thing licked her finger, and she whispered that it was just as scared as she was. Back to the present, they arrive at the Rowanfield Manor, and her father smiles proudly as he welcomes Nottingham to the estate, pointing out that it was built in the Renaissance style, which is quite rare around those parts. The butler appears, and her father quickly instructs him to prepare the finest tea and cakes for their special guest. Then he tells Madelyn to show Nottingham around the house. She immediately replies that she's not feeling well. Her father tries to insist maybe she could play something on the piano while they enjoy their afternoon tea. Before she can respond, Nottingham steps in with perfect timing and says he doesn't mind. Then he turns to Madelyn and says it was nice meeting her. She excuses herself and quietly walks away. Inside her head, the storm starts all over again. She thinks to herself that Ian Nottingham is right there in front of her, but this version of him hasn't yet been ruined by misfortune. He's still whole, still kind, still gentle. And that thought shakes something in her. Should she step in and make sure this version of him doesn't walk the same path? Should she try to change fate before it turns cruel? Then another thought answers her. She's been through enough. Their fate was always doomed from the start. Maybe it's better they never meet again. Maybe it's better to walk away while they still don't know what they'll lose. Madelyn flips through a stack of documents with that classic noble lady frown that says we are broke and no one wants to admit it. She mutters to herself that they need to visit the manor and check the lands before the war hits, because if they plan their spending and move to the countryside, they might scrape by. But if her father keeps gambling like life's a game of dice and spending like money grows in the rose garden, they'll be living on the street in no time. She's still thinking of ways to stop the financial disaster when her father knocks and peeks in like he hasn't just set the house on fire with bad investments. She tells him to come in and adds that she was just about to see him. He waltzes in with an invitation from London in hand, like it's a golden ticket to salvation, and tells her it's time to make her debut into high society. In her head, Madelyn sighs dramatically, like a woman who just got asked to wear heels during a storm, and thinks this is no time for balls and tea cakes, not with everything falling apart. Out loud, she asks if she really has to, and her father looks at her like she just asked if bread was optional for breakfast. He asks if she's unhappy, and she calmly picks up her tea and says pardon like a good daughter trying to keep her eye from twitching. But of course he takes the chance to complain that she's always breathing down his neck about money, and now she doesn't even want to get married. She quickly replies that she never said that, but he cuts her off with a dramatic gasp, saying refusing to debut is basically the same as announcing she's going to be single forever. He even got them a townhouse in London, and before he can go on, she calmly suggests he sell the house. He nearly chokes and tells her not to be ridiculous, so she adds that he should also drop the whole wine business idea. That gets his attention real fast. He turns to her with narrowed eyes and asks how she knew about the wine deal and if she's been reading his letters. How disappointing. She calmly tells him to stop, and he replies that she should stay out of business because such things aren't for young ladies. Madelyn doesn't even flinch as she calls him again and warns that if he dares to invest in wine, she'll refuse to enter high society and she'll never marry. He tries to talk again, but she keeps going. If he insists, she might even run off to a convent and become a nun. That shuts him up. Mr. Roanfield scolds her and says that's enough, and she's grounded until she apologizes. Now in London, Madelyn stands beside her father, asking if he's really sure he burned all the contracts, and he says yes with the confidence of a man trying to sound innocent even though he knows he's guilty. She squints at him and asks if he didn't hide any copies somewhere, and he insists he didn't. Why would he lie to her? As they stand at the ball, he asks why she won't let anyone dance with her. She's already rejected 6 offers, and she replies that she's just not sure yet. He gives her that classic disappointed dad look and reminds her she has a duty as a Roanfield to marry well and save the family. Then he walks off, muttering that he just doesn't understand her anymore. Madelyn watches him go and thinks to herself that the season of dances and gowns will be ruined by the war anyway. She doesn't want to pretend to be a pretty little doll anymore. She wants to choose her future, not have it handed to her on a platter wrapped in expectations. As long as she can keep the family from falling into ruin, she believes she'll find her own path. Maybe she'll keep learning the piano. She even heard women could get jobs after the war. She wonders if she might actually get one someday. Ian Nottingham strolls over casually, looking too handsome for his own good, and asks if the festival is boring her. Madelyn is clearly not expecting him, but manages to reply that it's not true, just that the whole thing feels strange. Ian looks around and says it seems like everyone's having a good time. She says it's unnerving to see them all so happy, completely unaware of what's coming. He agrees and says no one really knows what the future holds, so maybe they should enjoy the present while they still can. He tells her not to stress too much, because worrying now won't stop what's already heading their way. She insists she's relaxed, and says it's not that she doesn't see the value in these events or want others to enjoy themselves, but it's just not for her. Ian watches her for a moment, then gives her that mischievous smile and asks what if dancing with him is exactly what she wants. She looks at him, and for a second her heart may have skipped something. He stretches out his hand with a charming grin and asks if they can dance. Ian Nottingham sits with two other gentlemen at the edge of the ballroom as they sip their drinks and pretend to engage in polite conversation, but their eyes keep drifting to the dance floor. One of them nudges the other with a grin and says he should take a good look at that girl over there. The other squints and shrugs because there are far too many women in the room for him to know which one he means. The first guy rolls his eyes and explains that he's been counting just how many suitors she's turned down tonight. She's already rejected 6 offers to dance, and the night isn't even halfway over. He adds that she only made her debut recently, so she's clearly not desperate enough yet, though he admits she doesn't even look old enough to be thinking about marriage in the first place. Ian stays quiet the whole time sipping his tea, but he's not really listening because his eyes are fixed on her, and in his mind he's thinking that it's Madelyn. He remembers her saying earlier that she wasn't feeling well, but now she's out here turning down dances like she's auditioning for a role in a Regency drama. Across the room, 2 girls stand by the refreshments, pretending not to stare. One of them nudges the other and whispers that isn't that the Baron's daughter, and the other raises a brow and says, "How interesting." One of Ian's companions leans forward and says he's thinking of going over to speak with her, and the other snorts, reminding him that he doesn't even know the girl, and it would be terribly improper. Ian drops his teacup with a loud clink, and the second guy jokes that they're not in the Victorian era anymore. But before they can finish their sentence, Ian is already rising to his feet. They call after him, telling him to sit back down, but he doesn't even look their way. One of them laughs in disbelief because this is the first time in recorded history that Ian Nottingham has approached a woman without being dragged over by someone's mother. The 2 girls at the refreshments are now completely ignoring their drinks and instead staring at the dance floor. One of them gasps because Madelyn and Ian are already on their 4th dance together, and the other leans in asking who that girl even is. The reply comes quickly. Apparently she's just some noble lady from the countryside. Nothing special, just a mystery wrapped in tulle. As they dance, Ian lowers his voice and asks if she's all right because her hand is trembling, and the way she's looking at him makes it feel like she's the one comforting him instead of the other way around. Meanwhile, Madelyn wonders if she should tell him what's on her mind, or if it's better to just let go of his hand and disappear from his life altogether. She suddenly stumbles mid-turn, and he catches her quickly, telling her to be careful, and she keeps thinking that if fate ties them together again, she'll have to go through the same lonely years and heavy silence all over again. And then what? Her mind drifts back to the past when she was 26. She'd been in the garden that morning, and someone had ruined her roses. She stood among the mess fuming and asked who could have done something so heartless. Everyone in the manor knew how much she loved that garden. She looked down at her dog Corey and asked if he was the culprit, but the dog just barked at her in protest. She sighed because, honestly, Corey might have eaten a few slippers, but he wouldn't have the decency to trim a bush that neatly. So she gave up and hoped whoever did it at least found a little joy in destroying what she loved. That night, the rain poured down, and she ran into the storm, calling for Corey. She searched the gardens and along the hedges, ignoring the maid who followed behind with an umbrella and a scolding tone. The maid begged her to come back in, saying she'd catch her death out there, but Madelyn refused to answer. Then the butler stepped in and said he'd go looking for the dog once the rain stopped, and that she should wait inside. She turned around and told him to go inside himself, calling him by name, Sebastian, and adding that she would find Corey on her own. He looked at her stunned and asked how he could possibly leave her like this, but she snapped that none of them cared about her. She accused him of being scared of what the Earl would say if he disobeyed, and he insisted that wasn't true. Suddenly, Ian appeared beside them and told her they should all go back inside for the night. She asked him what about Corey, and he replied that it was just an animal and no one should risk their life over a dog. She stared at him like he'd slapped her because he was the one who gave her Corey in the first place. Corey was the only one who ever cared for her in that whole cold manner. Ian gently placed his hand on her shoulder and told her again to come inside. Back in the present, she's pulled from her thoughts as Ian softly calls her name, Miss Roanfield. Madelyn gently brushes his hand off her shoulder and says she's fine. She thanks him for the dances and wishes him good night, then turns to leave. He calls out to her, but she keeps walking, and he watches her go, mumbling that even after 4 dances she still won't change her. Mind, he sighs, a little disappointed. Later at dinner, the long table is being set by the chefs, and Madelyn tries not to sigh as she takes her seat. She tells herself it's fair enough. It's not like she expected to avoid Ian forever, especially not in this tight little bubble of high society, but she definitely didn't expect to be sitting right across from him. And with all the tensions whirling in the air, she quietly reaches for her water, hoping the evening goes by fast. Suddenly, Isabelle speaks sharply to Ian, accusing him of something, and Ian calmly tells her to lower her voice and stop being so emotional. Heads that this is why she keeps getting manipulated by that man. Isabelle stares at him wide-eyed and repeats the word emotional, then calls him out for insulting the man she clearly cares about. And that's when things get louder. Madelyn doesn't even look up from her glass, but her thoughts drift to another time. In her past life, when she married Ian Nottingham, he had no family left. His younger brother, Eric, caddied at the front line, and his sister Isabelle had already passed away before the war started. She died in a car crash, and there were whispers that it hadn't been an accident. They said she'd been in love with someone far below her social standing, and the weight of society's judgment drove them to make a tragic choice together. Madelyn used to wonder if things would have been different if Isabelle had lived. Maybe Ian wouldn't have turned into someone so bitter and cold. After Isabelle's death had never touched her things, he left the room exactly as it had been, as if preserving it would somehow keep. Her photo frames were still there. The piano she used to play spotless note when a speck of dust anywhere, everything was taken care of, like it was sacred to him. One afternoon, Madelyn had wandered into that very room in her past life. She noticed how well it was maintained and figured he must have loved his sister deeply. She picked up one of the framed photographs, and behind it slipped a second picture of Isabelle with a man she didn't recognize. She assumed that was Zachary Milloff, the man people said Isabelle had, for there was even a handwritten music sheet left on the piano. It was a love song Isabelle had written for him. People said he was a socialist, though Madelyn never really understood politics. She found herself wondering what kind of woman Isabelle really was. Was she graceful and elegant, the type to host tea parties and play classical pieces? Or was she bold and passionate, someone who burned bright and left before the world could dull her? Either way, she imagined that back when Isabelle played that piano, the entire manor must have felt a little warmer, maybe even joyful. And maybe, just maybe, if Isabelle had lived, Ian wouldn't have become the man Madelyn knew. She was still in that room when Ian had walked in and slammed the door open. His eyes immediately locked on her, and he barked at her to get out. She'd stood her ground back then and told him she was his wife and deserved to know why she couldn't be there, but he didn't explain. He just told her again never to step foot in that room. She remembered thinking how strong his attachment to his sister must have been to react like that. But now we're in the present, that image shatters right before her eyes. Because the same Isabelle who once seemed like a ghostly memory is now standing at the dinner table, calling Ian a lowlife and storming away. Ian tries to stop her, asking where she's going, but she just keeps walking, saying that she's tired of the suffocating life with him and can't stand living in a place like this anymore. And in that moment, everything comes full circle, because Madelyn suddenly remembers that this is exactly how Isabelle died. The man sitting beside Madelyn mentions how they've been arguing more than usual lately. She responds with a polite smile, saying she won't be long, then excuses herself before he can finish calling her back. Ian Nottingham watches her silently as she walks away. On the staircase, Madelyn spots someone and calls out sharply, "Lady Isabelle." Before Isabelle can escape, Madelyn grabs her wrist. Isabelle, clearly caught off guard, quickly apologizes and tries to leave, but Madelyn insists she stay. Isabelle eyes her suspiciously, then bluntly asks if she's off to meet her lover. Madelyn doesn't deny it, which only makes Isabelle gasp. So she was eavesdropping the whole time? Madelyn calmly explains that she only overheard by chance and gently removes Isabelle's hand from hers. But Isabelle scoffs and accuses her of being one of those shameless women swarming around her brother, thinking that would somehow get his attention. She turns to walk away, but Madelyn calls after her, casually asking if she's going to meet Mr. Milhoff. That stops Isabelle in her tracks. She spins around and demands to know how Madelyn knows that name. Madelyn tells her not to worry, she's not planning to tell anyone. She barely understands anything about socialism or whatever that movement is anyway. Isabelle's expression hardens again. Is she sure she's not one of her brother's spies? Madelyn assures her she's not. She says Ian might be a fine gentleman to some, but in her experience he's more skilled at control than charm. Isabelle smirks. She knows. She's very familiar with that side of him. Madelyn's voice softens as she grips Isabelle's hand. She warns her gently, saying she knows what it's like to be stuck under the thumb of a controlling man. Her past was shaped by such a grip, one that drove her to make choices she deeply regretted. She had once walked down a path of no return, not out of love or conviction, but out of pure anger. In that moment, as she holds Isabelle's hand, she isn't thinking about Ian or their tangled past. She just wants to save the woman in front of her, a woman who reminds her so much of herself, someone who's about to be blinded by rage and walk into ruin without realizing it. It might feel like there's no way out, but that's a lie. There are always more paths, but only if she doesn't quit now. Isabelle stands silent, eyes locked on Madelyn, then gently tells her it's all right now and she can let go. Right at that moment, Ian walks up the stairs and sees them holding hands. He interrupts stiffly, saying that this is a private matter between siblings, and Madelyn should excuse herself. Isabelle turns to Madelyn and asks what her name is again. Madelyn answers, Madelyn Roanfield. Without hesitation, Isabelle turns to her brother and declares that she'll be staying with Miss Roanfield from now on. Ian raises a brow, annoyed. He scolds her for being rude to a woman she just met. Isabelle brushes him off, saying they're socializing and he should mind his business. Madelyn quickly tells her to let go of her arm. Isabelle laughs and reminds her that she's the one who grabbed her hand first. Ian cuts in again, warning Isabelle that actions always have consequences, and addresses Madelyn with a cold Miss Roanfield. He adds that no matter how they met, it would be unwise to involve herself in another family's drama. Then, without waiting for a reply, he walks off. Madelyn watches him disappear down the hall and mutters under her breath. Typical. Not a single word of thanks for comforting his sister. She sighs, then picks up a newspaper lying nearby and flips through it. In the past, these papers were always filled with stories about Isabelle, but now there's nothing. She takes that as a good sign and leans back to rest her head. In her past life, maybe no one had managed to stop Isabelle. Maybe that argument was the last time Ian ever saw her. She remembers the day clearly. He barged into her room while she was playing piano. No knock, no warning, just Ian being Ian. She hadn't understood it then, but now it makes sense. Not long after, he gave her a piano of her own. Perhaps that was his awkward way of apologizing. Not with words. Of course, heaven forbid. But by gifting her something he knew she loved. Still, that's all in the past. What matters now is the upcoming social event. The next gathering is set to be held at the Kohlhath family's country estate, and Madelyn has a feeling things are about to get very, very interesting. At the Kohlhath family's country estate, the garden party is in full swing, and Madelyn looks around, wondering if Ian is present, but it seems he isn't, which means she might finally be able to talk to someone new for once. Just then, a man appears with a charming smile and offers his hand. She places hers on his and immediately regrets it, but it's too late now. He tells her it was worth throwing the entire party just for the chance to escort her. And she thinks to herself that even in her past life, this guy was dangerous. With words like that, no wonder he left a trail of weeping women behind. They sit together, having some tea before dinner, and he asks if she isn't hungry. She says she's fine, and he starts talking about Vienna, saying the city is modern and magnificent and would suit her perfectly. As he hands her a glass of wine, he says being in Vienna makes him believe humanity will continue to evolve and improve, and just as she reaches for the glass, she thinks to herself that sadly Vienna's about to get dragged into a war. Before she can take it, someone else snatches the glass and says he's not sure about that. Ian is suddenly there, calm and collected as ever, and the man sighs, saying he's late. Nearby, a woman whispers, "Isn't that the Nottingham?" and her companion nods, saying George used to be in the same class as him. They watch as Ian greets George with that polished grace of his, and Eric joins in too, saying it's been a while, and Isabelle stands nearby, clearly on edge. George challenges Ian's views, asking if he disagrees, and Ian responds that while human progress has been remarkable, it's rarely peaceful. Selfishness and conflict have always been part of human nature, and ironically that's what pushes society forward. George asks if he's really suggesting war is necessary for progress, and Ian says reform tends to come hand in hand with violence, and that no matter how globally connected the world becomes, if the right conditions arise, another war is inevitable. Ian then turns to Madelyn and asks what she thinks. She agrees that military power has driven innovation, but questions if any advancement is worth the price of countless lives. Even if it's true, she says it's the people who accept evil as necessary that make wars happen. George seems surprised by her honesty, and Madelyn wonders if she might have said too much. But Ian doesn't look offended at all. In fact, he looks kind of impressed. Then Eric pipes up, saying he's completely lost in all this politics, and asks if anyone's going to Wimbledon this year. George laughs, asking if tennis is still a thing, and Eric says Ian is so good at it, he's tempted to drag him into the men's doubles. Ian tries to downplay it, but Eric keeps teasing, saying he'll have to beat him first. George laughs again and challenges Eric, who swears he's not to be underestimated. Amid all the chatter, Madelyn quietly gets up and walks away. Ian watches her go, and she thinks to herself that she didn't mean to challenge him so bluntly, but he didn't seem mad about it. On the contrary, he looked oddly pleased. As she walks further, she spots Isabelle standing beside her lover, looking blissfully in love. They seem so happy, like they'd die for each other, and a part of her aches wishing she could have experienced a love like that. Then she hears her name and turns. It's Ian. He says he wants a word, and she freezes, thinking if he gets any closer, he'll definitely see Isabelle. The moment he moves closer, she can already sense that it's not just small talk he wants, and sure enough, he brings up Isabelle and the last time they talked. He admits he shouldn't have snapped at her that day, and even acknowledges that she was just being concerned. She gives him a quiet nod, then turns to leave, but her mind races. Isabelle is going to get caught at this rate, so she has to get him out of here somehow. She suddenly asks if they can go back inside, and he stops her with a puzzled look. For some time now, he's been trying to figure her out. She's always had this cold air around her, like she can't stand being near him. He wonders if she actually despises him. She raises her brows, a little surprised by the word, but says nothing. He half laughs and says maybe he's just imagining it, but still hopes her dislike isn't that deep. He says it'd be a loss for both of them, and that no one really knows what the future holds. The sun is already setting, and the breeze is picking up, so he suggests they head in, but she declines and tells him to go ahead. She wants to stay out just a little longer. He lets out a quiet sigh, like he half expected her answer, and tells her she really doesn't give him even the tiniest opening, does she? He promises to leave her be for today, but adds that he doesn't plan on backing down anymore, and with that he leaves. She watches his retreating figure and suddenly remembers the pair hidden away in the garden. To people like that who believe love is fire and devotion, how silly must she and Ian look? A man who confuses control with affection, standing before her like a shield from the cold, with his shadow looming over her. She tells herself not to fall for it, not again, because she remembers it all too well. In her past life at just 25, she sat on her bed completely drained, thinking, how long does she have to keep living like this, until she dies? But what happens to Corey when I'm gone? Or worse, what if he dies first and leaves her behind in that empty, forgotten place? That thought alone was enough to break her. The idea of being stuck in that wretched life, even in death, haunted her. What if her soul never left and she was trapped there for eternity, wandering like a ghost? As she stood from the bed, Corey had looked up at her silently, and she told herself not to let him worry. She would handle it all somehow. Now back in the present, the next morning, Ian sits at his desk scribbling something, but he suddenly stops when the butler approaches. He looks up and asks what his wife did this time. The butler clears his throat and reports that her ladyship left the manor during the night with Corey. Madelyn sits quietly in a dim cinema hall at the heart of London, eyes wide as she watches black and white images flicker across the screen. She still can't believe it. She actually did it. She ran away from home. The Nottingham estate must be upside down by now. She wonders if Ian's pacing the halls or if he's relieved to finally be rid of her. On screen, Charlie Chaplin plays a homeless tramp who finds an abandoned child and raises him as his own. They're not even related. Not a single drop of blood connects them, yet there he is, loving and protecting the boy like family. Madelyn stares, completely absorbed, her thoughts drifting. How can someone give that much when it's not even their child? By the time the credits roll, she's misty-eyed and whispers a soft apology to Corey for keeping him waiting. She unwraps a sandwich and offers it to the little dog beside her, who's already halfway through his own portion like he hasn't eaten in years. She chuckles, still amazed by the moving pictures on the wall. It was fun, really fun. Her first time out in London, and she actually enjoyed it. But then reality kicks back in. Where can she buy food for Corey later? What about her laundry? She hasn't even figured out how laundromats work here. As she's about to toss the sandwich wrapper, there's a knock at the door and someone slides a letter under it. She picks it up, squints, and freezes. It's a telegram from Ian Nottingham. It says he'll be waiting at the station. Already? It's not even been a full day since she left. She thought she escaped, but clearly not. And yet, why does that message make her feel relieved? Years earlier, at age 17, she'd often sit on her bed, staring at the ceiling with dramatic thoughts floating through her head. Was there no way to live in peace without an inheritance or marrying someone with a title? Why didn't she memorize a few stock names before dying and ending up in this mess? At this rate, she wasn't sure if she was a noble or just a very well-dressed fool. She sighs. A light tap on her forehead breaks the spiral, and she looks up to see Ian. He says she looks tired a lot lately. Maybe the London air isn't working for her. He takes a seat beside her, and she agrees, though she blames her late-night studies more than the fog. He jokes if she's reading ancient Greek. She says it's not far off. It's like studying how to dodge a tragic fate. She's basically been up thinking about survival. Ian, with a confused look, tells her this isn't something a noble girl should be worried about. He suspects it might be because of Lord Roanfield. Apparently, even in London, her father's spending habits are common gossip. She reassures him. It's true she needs to prepare herself, and he advises her to get someone capable to fix the problem rather than burning herself out. Be practical, he says. She smiles and agrees, though quietly adds she wants to learn how to live without leaning on anyone. Then she asks him something strange, if he's ever hated himself so much that it made him bitter toward others. Ian blinks. Why would he hate himself? She laughs a little at his honest confusion and apologizes, calling herself rude. He brushes it off, says her curiosity isn't a bother. She calls his confidence admirable, and right as she starts feeling weirdly comfortable, the door bursts open and someone rushes in. Lord Roanfield has gone bankrupt. Madelyn bursts into the house and without wasting a second asks where her father is. The maid quickly replies he's in his room. She asks how long he's been there, and the maid says since noon, but he gave strict orders not to let anyone in. Madelyn wraps her arms around herself, then storms straight to his room and flings the door open. Her eyes dart to the butler standing beside her father, and the maid behind her quickly explains that he only allowed the butler. The two slip out, and Mr. Roanfield sighs, asking what this fuss is about and if she plans to keep acting so unladylike. She ignores the scolding and demands an explanation about the rumor that he's gone bankrupt. He tries to dodge, but she brings up how he burned those contracts just days ago. He sighs again, then confesses that yes, it's all true. The trading company he invested everything in collapsed, and now every coin is gone. He grabs her hand and says she's his only hope now. Madelyn stares at him silently. She tells herself she should be glad he's alive, because now she can help him. She assures him they'll get through it somehow and offers a plan. They'll sell the land and the townhouse and somehow pay off the rest. But he scoffs and says, why would a nobleman work? Then he mentions Master Nottingham showing interest in her, and her eyes narrow. She insists they've only danced a few times, but her father isn't buying it. Does she know how rarely that man looks at a woman? If not for this situation, he would have been done for. Is she really still this naive? If not him, then someone else will do. She needs to forget all that nonsense and find someone wealthy. At a party a few nights later, she stares out at the crowd, thinking of how set her father is on this marriage thing. How in the world is she going to convince him otherwise? If they sold off everything, including the Roanfield Manor, they might get by, but then what? They'd have nowhere to live and no way to survive. Honestly, this is no time to be attending parties, if only her father wasn't bedridden. Someone suddenly calls her name. She turns and it's Lord Periel, smiling like a cat who just found cream. He says he's glad she's enjoying his party and asks for a dance. She politely declines, saying she's not feeling too well and maybe another time. But he doesn't back off. He says he's heard about her family's misfortune, but since they have her, Lord Roanfield must be sleeping just fine. He notes that 17 is a ripe age, and surely there's a queue of men ready to rescue her from her troubles. He adds that it doesn't have to be him, of course. Madelyn clenches her jaw and tells herself not to cause a scene. Things are already bad enough. She forces a smile and thanks him for the advice. Just then, Ian steps up beside her and says someone should turn up the music. She calls his name quietly, but he doesn't look at her. He says something's grating his ears. Probably the voice of a drunken fool who thinks unsolicited comments are pearls of wisdom. So yes, he'll tend to the music. Another gentleman murmurs that Ian was a bit rude to the host and he didn't need to interfere. Ian replies he simply couldn't stand by. He turns to Madelyn and asks when she's ever bothered to be bothered, and before she can respond, Isabelle slips in, grabs Madelyn's hand, and says the new dress catalog just came out. They should go look at it right now. Madelyn blinks. That was sudden. Isabelle leans closer and whispers that it was a ladylike excuse. She's been wondering, though. Madelyn's not some kind of seer, is she? Madelyn chuckles and says she doesn't think so, but maybe she does know a few things about the future. Isabelle nods dramatically. She knew the name of the man she liked and even guessed what she was about to do. She asks if Madelyn was really planning to die. Madelyn says it was just a silly joyride, and Isabelle stares at her. She knows how foolish that sounds, right? She thought she was all prim and proper, but she doesn't really hold back, do she? Madelyn says saving face isn't really her goal in this life. Isabelle laughs and says she sounds just like someone she knows. Madelyn asks who that is, and Isabelle says an old friend. She has a feeling they'll be good friends, too. Madelyn echoes the words in her head, an old friend. Isabelle shrugs and says she's telling her all this because she likes her. Plus her brother said he's going to invite her to their home soon. Madelyn takes a breath and tells herself a lot may have changed in this life, but fate doesn't really ask for permission. It just keeps dragging her along like a tide, and somehow it feels like she's drifting back into the current of her past. Madelyn's jaw almost drops the moment Ian drops to one knee right in front of her like it's the most normal thing in the world. Of course she's stunned. Marriage? To him, she definitely wasn't expecting that. Ian, being Ian, says he'll get straight to the point. He heard her family's bankrupt and he's offering to help. Just like that. She looks at him like he's missing the point entirely and asks what that's got to do with anything. He calmly explains that he can give her what she needs. He's already convinced his parents and everything is all set. He opens a small box and brings out a ring like it's some kind of business contract and tells her he wants to marry her. Then he adds that his father isn't doing so well and he'd like him to witness the wedding before it's too late. She blinks and asks, "See what exactly?" and he says them, married. She stares at him quietly for a moment before asking the real question, "Do you love me?" And again she repeats it, "Do you actually love me?" Ian straightens up and sighs, saying, Rather than something as fickle as love, he thinks it's more accurate to say he finds her pleasing, or maybe he likes her. He says she always acts like some philosophical poet and talks about ideals that make no sense in real life. He apologizes for putting it that way, but he thinks she's more responsible than her father, and reminds her that she once said she wanted to live without relying on anyone else. Well, this is the way to do it, realistically speaking. And besides, he'd rather have someone clever than the usual clueless girls in society. He tells her not to let this opportunity slip past her. She crosses her arms and tells him he's always tried to buy people's affection, and Ian quickly denies it. She calls his name and says she's not here to accept a proposal. He asks if she just needs time to think, but she shuts that down too, saying she's not going to sell herself just to pay off her father's debts. She's made that mistake once, and she's not going to do it again. Ian blinks and asks what she's even talking about. He says this is a good deal for her too, and he's not trying to be insulting. But she calls his name again and tells him they can't be together. Ian looks genuinely hurt and asks why. He says it feels like she just made a fool out of him, and she says it's because they only know how to tear each other down. He walks away without another word, and Madelyn just stands there thinking maybe she shouldn't have come at all. Even if Ian hasn't done anything wrong just yet, hope has no place between them. Her mind suddenly drifts back to when she was 26, sitting by the window crying her eyes out over Corey. It had rained all night, and she was terrified something bad had happened to him. Then there was a knock on the door, and the butler walked in with Corey safe and sound. The dog leapt into her arms, and she hugged him tightly as relief washed over her. The butler told her the gardener found him soaked but perfectly fine. She quickly asked where the gardener was, so she could thank him, but the butler just smiled and said he was only doing his duty. Then he added that Lord Nottingham had caught a cold and wouldn't be seeing anyone. She asked if it was serious, and the butler assured her that the doctor only recommended bed rest but warned her not to go upstairs. Madelyn nodded, but stood in front of Ian's door for a long while. She whispered that it had to be a coincidence that he got sick right after that storm. Then curiosity got the better of her. She opened the door slowly, thinking she'd just check that he was all right. But the moment she stepped in, she saw his coat lying on the floor completely soaked. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the wet clothes and thought to herself it couldn't possibly be true. Could it? Madelyn quietly stares at the man resting before her, and deep down something doesn't feel right. She starts to suspect that it was I and who went out in the storm to find Corey. Head doesn't want to believe it, but his clothes are still wet. And when she checks his forehead, he's burning up, and when he finally stirs awake, he's not even fully conscious. He blinks, either like he's seeing someone else, and starts whispering apologies to a woman named Isabelle, saying he should have let her make her own choices. She repeats that it's his fault, and begs her to forgive him, and Madelyn grabs his hand and gently tells him to calm down, that she's not Isabelle, she's Madelyn, Nottingham, his wife. And when he hears that, he squints a little confused, then slowly repeats the word wife like he's trying to make sense of it all. Then suddenly light breaks into the room and reflects off a nearby flower, and just like that the memory crashes in back during the war. Lieutenant Nottingham had been shouting orders telling his men to retreat. The enemy was advancing, and one soldier cried out that they couldn't just leave their comrades, who were badly injured. He clutched his bleeding leg, begging not to die, saying that the lieutenant should save them. Then another shouted out for him to look out, but the moment ended there, because I jolts awake, breathing hard again from that same night. Mere the same one that's haunted him for years. But this time something's different. This hand isn't cold. There's someone holding it, and when he looks down, he sees her asleep next to his bed, and he freezes. Why is she there? Was she taking care of him all this time? Reason her presence calms him in a way. He's not used to that nightmare, always drags him back into his darkest memories. But with her beside him, the war seems miles away. They were never meant to be a perfect match. He knows that she was young and naive, and he was damaged beyond repair, a broken soldier who'd seen too much, and she was someone who still believed in flowers and poetry. Yet somehow she managed to cross into his lonely world and even brought him into her. She calls on asking Sebastian if Madelyn might feel less lonely if she had a dog, and now where they are the dead. Woof them sitting in the aftermath of everything, unsure what to call what they've built. Eventually, she wakes up rubbing her eyes and tells him he had a terrible fever, but says she's all right now and casually asks about Corey, the tiny troublemaker, and she says he's fine, probably planning his next escape. And then Ian mentions that she once said she wanted to go see a movie, and she nods a bit surprised, and he tells her that she can go out whenever she please, no more restrictions and no more locked gates, and she just stares at him confused like wait what since whenish. At this generous he even adds that she can attend as many parties and events as she's completely thrown off because just days ago he acted like letting her out of the house was an national security risk. No, suddenly he's Miss Freedom, but as she explains himself, she hears something different. He says she never wanted to drag her into his problems, and she tells him not to talk like that, but he insists, and says just because they don't something doesn't mean it isn't true. Then as she gets up and tells her to call Sebastian on her way out, she stops him and says that he can take as many roses from the garden as she likes. After all, it's his Stu turns back to look at there, and she watches him, insolence, wondering maybe, just maybe it's all right to have a little hope that something real could grow between them. Maybe this isn't the end, maybe this is her last chance, and for the first time in a while he smiles and thanks her. She drops a cup of tea on the prosody rod table and gently asks how he's feeling. He says he's fine, and she nods, pretending that's all she needed to hear, but secretly she's surprised. Ian's been acting friendlier lately, which is quite the shift from how cold he used to be. Back then, even asking how he felt would have earned her a glare and a new reason to avoid him. Her eyes drift to a book on the table, an original copy of Tamburlaine the Great. Fancy. She doesn't hide her interest, and he offers to let her take it to read. She raises a brow, asking if he means to just give it to her. But in her mind, she reminds herself not to get any funny ideas. Just because he's acting soft doesn't mean the man has transformed. She tells him that, technically, since they're married, it belongs to her too. But let's be real, everything in that manor belongs to him. He replies casually, saying, just as her garden is his study is also hers. And she blushes, like actually blushes. What is going on here? Later, Ian turns to Sebastian and asks about the wall repairs. If another war breaks out, he says, the first line of defense will be the most important, so he wants Sebastian to oversee it himself. Sebastian agrees without question while Madelyn silently watches the two men. She thinks to herself, when will Ian ever get past the war? Maybe if he could find something to distract himself even just for a while. Then her eyes go back to that play. So that's what he likes, huh? Suddenly an idea hits her. She calls for the staff and asks them to prepare the manor for a movie screening. The butler blinks at her like she's lost her mind and tells her it's too much. No proper space, too many things to prepare. She smiles and says they can use the chapel in the back garden, and for the first time ever, Ian has trusted her with something official. So she's determined to pull it off. Everyone actually seems excited about the idea, which gives her even more motivation. The butler suggests maybe she should just throw a tea party instead. Something simple. Something they've done before. But she shakes her head. She says the manor needs something new. She knows it might sound naive, but she wants to show Ian that the world is healing. If he can finally put the war behind him, maybe things will change for him too. Sebastian softens and admits he didn't recognize her good intentions at first, but now he's on board and promises to help. She thanks him just as someone walks in holding a massive hunting trophy and asks where to place it. Ian says to put it in his, then stops as she chimes in and says they'll put it back after the party. For now, they need the space. She thinks to herself that she really hopes this turns out to be a good idea. The preparations begin, and just supervising everything is exhausting. From decorating the chapel to sorting out the food, she's running up and down like a general at war. But seeing the manor so lively for the first time actually makes her feel alive. Ian pretends not to care, but she knows better. He's just giving her the space she needs by pretending not to notice. Still, she has to be sure. She finds herself standing outside his door, and before she can change her mind, she knocks. He tells her to come in, and she walks in asking if he's still working. He says yes, but insists it helps him relax. She confesses she's nervous. This is the first time they'll be inviting guests over, and what if it goes terribly? She did send out invitations, but they barely know anyone in town. This is her first real event as the Earl's wife, and she wants it to be perfect. Ian simply says she's doing just fine. She tells him she's planning to show the movie after the tea party and asks if he's ever seen one. He says just once at an exhibition in Paris. She places a hand on his shoulder and says then they must watch it together. It'll be fun. He stares at her quietly, and she excuses herself, saying she'll let him get back to relaxing. Outside his room, she lets out a small smile. She's glad she told him. The day of the screening arrives, and to her relief, the guests come flooding in. The turnout is way better than expected. She hears that the line between commoners and nobles is getting thinner these days, which explains why everyone's dressed so differently. Then again, most of them probably just came to see if the rumored ghost of the manor is real. She looks around and wonders if Ian will even show up. With so many eyes on him, it might be too much. What if he doesn't come at all? Just as that worry creeps in, she hears a familiar voice apologizing for being late. She turns, and there he is. Ian Nottingham introducing himself to the crowd as the master of the manor. If you're just as hooked as we are and can't wait to find out what happens next, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below asking for part 2 and let us know your favorite moments so far. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next episode drops. See you in part 2. Ciao for now.